Good morning. Today's daf is daf Pei Hey in Masechet Chullin. We are near the bottom of Pei Daled Amabet. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Because of the two recordings being in relative close proximity late last night and then this morning, I figured I would just do one document. So we're in the middle of the document and we are now at the questions with the circle indentation markers, the circle bullet points. And I will just note that yesterday we wondered about sort of what violation is involved in covering the blood of a chaya or oaf on Shabbos or Yontif. And as I mentioned, I actually remarkably remembered correctly that it is in fact in Masechet Shabbos, back in Masechet Shabbos on, I believe it's Daf Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. So that is where it is a discussion of how one goes about engaging in kisui on Shabbos and Yontif in an appropriate situation. And so the bottom line is that the shovel's supposed to be in the ground already, and if you need to, you have to do it with your hand and not with your foot, and because out of respect for the mitzvah. In any event, those details are located over there. But the bottom line is that the issue is one of concern about potentially digging and the like. But during the discussion yesterday, so the reason that we raised the discussion is because Rav Eina said that actually one who slaughters a bird or a chaya for an ill person on Shabbos does have to do the covering of the blood, and it seems like it would be even if it involves the violation of Shabbos or Yontif. But Rabbah pointed out that a brisa effectively assumes that you cannot do it, because it talks about the prohibition and that prohibition, although we reject the Kal V'chomer that prohibition is used as part of it, the underlying fact itself is not rejected. So now that we've done that and challenged Rav Eina and we don't have an answer, the Gemara does not provide an answer to Rabbah's question on Rav Eina. The Gemara now picks up by quoting two different elements. We're going to first do one and then another element of the brisa to understand it better. So Amru Lo, they said to Rabbi Yossi, right? The first question that was asked about Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer, and again, let's remember what the Kal V'chomer is. Rabbi Yossi says that a koi, which is a suffix chaya, suffix behema, cannot be slaughtered on Yantif, and if one did, one would not cover its blood. Now, what was the basis for this? It was basis on the following. When it comes to circumcision, where if there's a definite obligation, one would violate Shabbos, but when there's an uncertain obligation, we don't violate Shabbos. So too, when it comes to a koi, which is when it comes,
We said it was uncertain regarding Yom Tov, right?
what was that?
Said uncertain regarding Yom Tov in
Yes,
the
even if it's
Oklahoma.
uncertain regarding Yontif, even if well, it doesn't make a difference whether it's Yontif or Shabbos, we would say that you don't violate Shabbos or Yontif for a bris. And so when it comes to a koi, where when it comes to covering blood, where we don't cover blood of a chaya on Shabbos, when it comes to the questionable situation, of course we're not going to violate Shabbos or Yontif with respect to it. So that was the Kal V'chomer. And then the rabbis respond and say that's not a good Kal V'chomer because I can give you something where we don't do it on Shabbos, and yet on Yontif we do it even in an uncertain situation. And what is it that I'm talking about? It's talking about shofar. Amrulot tekiah shofar begvuz tochiach. The blowing of shofar outside the base of Migdash, that will show that your Kal V'chomer is not right. She'ein v'da'ah docha Shabbos, because the certain case, when it's certainly Shabbos and it's even a certain obligation, we don't blow the shofar because we're concerned that people are going to carry, etc. Usveika, and yet when we're uncertain about the situation because we don't know whether the person is male or female, Docha Yom Tov will blow the shofar for that person even on Yom Tov, even though it's uncertain.
Could you make the same argument regarding the lulav?
Yeah, potentially 100%. You can make potentially the same argument regarding lulav. So absolutely, it would seem like. But now the problem we're going to now outline. We're going to now question this this kal vachomer. My sveka. First of all, let's understand what the suffix is. Right. First is ilem a suffix chol suffix yom tov. If you tell me that it's maybe a weekday and maybe it's Yantif, so we're unsure about what day of the Chag it is, and so that's the situation. Hashtavada Yom Tov Dachya, Suffolk Yom Tov Suffolk Chol Mi Boy. That can't be the situation because that would be a Kal V'chomer in the other direction. When it comes to a definite Yom Tov, we're going to blow the shofar on Yantif. So when a day is maybe Chol, which is of course permitted to blow the shofar, and maybe Yom Tov, where again it's permitted to blow the shofar, of course you would blow the shofar. So that can't be it as we turn to Pei Hey Amud Aleph. Ella Suffolk Ish Suffolk Isha must be talking about where it, as we said before, as Rashi highlighted, where we're unsure whether a person is male or female. And even though a female is not obligated in shofar because it's a mitzvah sasesha zman grama, even so, we're allowed to blow for her on Yontif, even though there is no definitive obligation. I'm sorry, and sorry, we're allowed to blow for this uncertain male or female, even though it's not a definitive obligation. So
Could
Rabbi
you say that
Yosef,
by going to suffix katan?
what was that? Yeah, you could probably do the same thing
Suffix
with the
katan.
suffix katan. So Rabbi Yossi l'taimei, and Rabbi Yossi is follows his reason for saying that this doesn't work. Da'amar isha vada'it nami taka, because Rabbi Yossi says even somebody who's definitively a woman, we're going to blow a shofar, and of course that's how we paskin. So that's not going to be a valid reason. Tanya. Bnei Yisrael somchen v'lo benos Yisrael somchos. We have a rule that the male Jewish people lean on their sacrifices, but daughters, but females do not lean on sacrifices that they bring on Shabbos and Yantif. On Yantif. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Nashim Somchos Rishus. No, women
Right.
have the right to lean if they want. And so as a result, the point is, and that is Rabbi Yossi's position, that he holds that women can do that. And so similarly, women can do shofar. And again, and more generally, we end up poskening that women, especially in the Ashkenazi community, women are able to do mitzvah saseh shazman grama in general, and that they would even make a bracha for it, unlike the Sephardic community where they do not make a bracha. So so that is one aspect. On Amar Ravina, Ravina explains, Ulmai de Ka'amri Rabbana Nami Islay Pircha, even the rabbis, there's a problem with their argument. Meaning, even if you don't hold like Rabbi Yossi, again, Rabbi Yossi says that a woman herself is obligated in can have a shofar blown for her, and therefore, when you have a suffix man, suffix woman, of course you could blow the shofar on Yantiv. So there's no aspect of a Kal V'chomer here because the situation that you're trying to set up of a possible non-obligation is a true obligation. So Amar Ravina says, no, Ulamai Dekamri Rabbana Nami Islay Pircha. Even what the rabbis say according to their own thinking has a problem. Ma Latkia Shofar, Shekain Vada'a Docha Shabbos B'Mikdash. When it comes to the shofar, it does override Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. So as a result, there is a leniency associated with it. And so as a result, because of that leniency, you can't use that to undermine Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer, because that is more lenient than Kisui. Tomer B'Kisui Delese B'Klal. There is no exception for covering blood on Shabbos. And so as a result, your question, the rabbis, is not a good question, and the undermining of and so as a result, at least as you go through the rabbi's comment, there is no response yet to Rebbe Yossi's Kavachomer. And then we're going to get Heshiv Rebbe Lazar Kapar Beribi. So Rebbe Lazar Kapar, the great person, Beribi can sometimes mean the greatest in the generation. Here Rashi notes that it's just Ish Gadol, Adam Gadol. It's take a look in the 1, 2, 3 on Pei Dal and Rebbe. If you take a look at Rashi, 6 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi, you'll see Beribi Adam Gadol, that he's a great man. So, but in any event, what does Rebbe Lazar Kapar say? He says, Ma. Lemila shekain ena no heges belela yom tovim. When it comes to circumcision, it doesn't apply at night, and so as a result, because it has a different scope. There's no possibility of it happening at night. There's a possible leniency, or at least a difference that undermines the nature of the Kal V'chomer that Rabbi Yossi is making, because he's trying to make a Kal V'chomer from circumcision to covering blood. Covering blood does apply both at night and during the daytime. And indeed, Rabbi Lazar Kappa referenced Belela Yom Tovim. So the Gemara now asks, Belela
But
Yom.
isn't there an exception didn't on Shabbat? Isn't there a way to cover the blood? You prepare the dirt in
Yes,
advance.
yes, 100%. That's what I referred to at the very beginning. That
Right.
The Gemara
So how
Masechet
do we
Shabbos
say
says,
there's no? How
how,
do we say there's no exception then?
no. What it means by no exception is that there's no exception to enable you to violate the prohibitions on Shabbos. There's no exception that allows you to do from scratch
Oh,
the
okay. All
covering
right.
of the dirt.
All right.
Meaning,
Okay.
obviously, if you have the dirt set up ahead of time so that you can just move it over and thereby cover the fulfill the mitzvah without violating any prohibition, of course you should do it. But here we're dealing with a situation where
Okay.
you didn't set it up ahead of time. So
Mhm.
again, we try to use circumcision to be a kal v'chomer, and then, again, this is a Reb Yossi's kal v'chomer. It wasn't relevant to our comment about Rav Eina. Rav Eina's statement about being able to do it on Shabbos has been undermined. But right now we're trying to understand Rabbi Lazar Kappar's comment in the Brisa, because he referenced not doing circumcision on Yontif nights, but that implied Bishar Lele Nahaga. You can do it on other nights. We don't do circumcision on any nights. So Ella Mala Mila Shikain Ainano Heges Belelos Kiviyamim. No, what it really means, even though Rabbi Lazar Kapar referenced doing circumcision Belele Yomim Tovim, he really doesn't mean on Yontif specifically. He just means night in general. So Tomer Bekisui Shenoheg Belelos Kiviyamim. Can you say that when you talk about circumcision, it doesn't apply at night? So can you say anything that's true? Can you use it as a kal v'chomer with respect to covering the blood, where it does apply both at night and during the daytime? And so again, we conclude this Gemara with the statement that we quoted from the Brisa. We're not going to comment on it further. Amar Rabbi Abba zechad min hadvarim asher Amar Rabbi Chia ein li aleihen tshuva. V'heshiv Rabbi Lazar hakapar b'Rabbi tshuva. That this is one of those things that Rabbi Chia said he didn't have an refutation for, and yet Rabbi Lazar Kapar was able to bring a refutation for the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so now we bring it. That
So
brings us.
what's the bottom line then?
The bottom line is that Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer is not a valid Kal V'chomer, but the question that Rabbah asked on Rav Eina is a valid question, and so as a result, we can't, we don't have a definitive Kal V'chomer. But the bottom line is that on Shabbos, even if one were to have a sick person for whom they are slaughtering an animal, you would slaughter the animal for the sick person, but you would not cover the blood if the animal that's slaughtered is either a bird or a chaya. Okay, so now we're talking about covering blood, and we're going to have the main source of the machlokes that are one of the key sources of the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. Right? We saw that Rabbi Shimon holds that a shchita that is not a good shchita is not considered a shchita. A slaughtering that's not a good, that doesn't result in a kosher animal is not a good slaughtering. And Rabbi Meir says, no, it is a good slaughtering. So let's take a look. Hashochet v'nimtzas treifa, v'hashochet la'avodas kochavim, v'hashochet l'chulin b'fnim v'kodshim b'chutz, chaya v'of haniskalin. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cases. Let's go through them. So the first case is if it's a treifa. The second case is if you slaughter it for avodah zarah. The third case is if you slaughter a non-sacred animal inside the Beis Hamikdash. The fourth case is if you slaughter a sanctified animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. And the fifth case is if you slaughter an animal that is supposed to be stoned, maybe because it had relations with a human being. In any event, in all 5 of those cases, you are not obligated, even if you do a proper shchita for the animal, because the animals in all of these 5 cases are not kosher animals, are not able to be eaten. The Tanna Kama says that you don't have any obligation to cover the blood. And yet, Rabbi Meir mechayev. Rabbi Meir says you're chayev, v'chachamim potrim. And the chachamim say you're not. Okay. Now, I will note that when it came to the obligation of oto ve'et bino, we had these same categories in a Mishnah back on Pei Aleph Amabet, where we had a very similar argument and 2 different opinions. We had the opinion of the Chachamim that said you're liable for doing both the killing the mother and the child, even though the child was being slaughtered. The child was a treifa. The child was the second one slaughtered was for idolatry. The second one was for chulin inside the Beis Hamikdash, or kachim outside the Beis Hamikdash, and needed to be stoned. And Rabbi Shimon said that you were exempt. So we're going to discuss that. That's going to be the first topic in our Mishnah, but it's important to have that as background. So, and then the Mishnah concludes, Hashochet v'nisnabla b'yado. If you do the shchita, but you did something wrong in the shchita, and therefore the animal became a nevela because you didn't do a proper shchita, hanocher v'hama'aker. For example, you pierced it or you tore out the pipes, pater melachasos. Then it seems like everybody agrees that you would not be obligated because the action that you did was not a proper shchita. It wasn't just that it ended up with an animal that wasn't kosher. In that situation, Rabbi Meir would tell you that you're liable to do, that you have to do the covering of the blood. But here, because the action that you did was not a shchita, you essentially took a gun and shot it in the head. There you no longer have to do shchita. It's not subject to that mitzvah. It's only subject to the mitzvah when you do a shchita action, even according to Rabbi Meir. And the question is, the debate is, does it have to be a valid shchita? Does it have to result in a kosher animal? The Chachamim in our Mishnah say, no, yes, it does. If it doesn't result in a kosher animal, as for example, the animal's a treifa, it was slaughtered for idolatry, it's chulin inside the Beis Hamikdash, or kachim outside the Beis Hamikdash, or it's a chaya or of haniskal. In all those situations, then you're not going to be liable. Where Rabbi Meir says no, the action was a true shchita action, and therefore you are going to be liable to cover the blood with the dirt. Okay, so our Mishnah.
Nevela, if with the nevela, the last case, it becomes a nevela. So they have to cover the blood, right? Or you don't have to cover it?
No, you don't have to cover the blood. Everybody agrees you don't have to cover the blood. Paton l'makasas. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Again, remember that in the Mishnah back in Pei Aleph Amud Bet, we say almost the opposite opinions, meaning that the Chachamim there say that you're liable, that you have to, that you are going to be, that you're violating the prohibition of Otova et Beno, and it was Rabbi Shimon who says that you're not liable in these situations. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ra Rebbe, Dvarav Shel Rabbi Meir, Ba'oto Be'et Beno. That Rebbe agreed with Rabbi Meir in saying that a shchita that doesn't result in a kosher animal is still considered a shchita when it comes to the prohibition of it and its offspring. Ushna'o b'lashon chachamim. And therefore, when he taught Rabbi Meir's opinion, he taught it as a chachamim-based opinion. Udu Rabbi Shimon b'kisui adam. And in our Mishnah, he agrees with Rabbi Shimon that when you have a shechita that doesn't result in a kosher animal, it's not considered a valid shechita, and therefore, it's you're going to not have to do kisui hadam, and so that's why Ushna'o b'lashon chachamim. And so in our Mishnah, Rebbe uses again, it's Rebbe Shimon's position, but Rebbe uses a language of saying that the chachamim agree with him. So that way, we in our Mishnah, the chachamim and the paskening would be like the saying that the person's exempt from covering the blood, and in the other Mishnah, it would be like Rabbi Meir because he uses the language of chachamim for Rabbi Meir and not like Rabbi Shimon, and you would be liable for violating Otova et Beno. So my time at the Rabbi Meir Otova et Beno. So what's the reasoning? So now we're going to go through again. The machlokus is whether a shchita, proper action, you did the right thing, you cut the pipes the way you're supposed to cut them, but it resulted in a non-kosher animal. Rabbi Meir says that it doesn't matter. That's still considered a valid shechita. Rabbi Shimon says it's not a valid shechita. So we are going to try and understand both in connection with Otov et Beno and here with respect to covering blood, why each of them hold their respective opinions. So my time of the Rabbi Meir Otov et Beno. Why does he hold that an unfit shechita is still called a shechita? So I'm Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Gamar Shchita Mishchutei Chutz. We're learning Shchita from slaughtering a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. Ma hasam Shchita she'ena ruya, Shma Shchita. Just as the slaughtering of a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash is called Shchita by the Torah and results in a non-kosher animal, so too, the slaughtering here that results in a non-kosher animal is going to be called shchita. Rabbi Shimon, my time, Rabbi Shimon disagrees. So he has to give a different explanation because obviously if he agreed with the Rabbi Meir's logic, he would also reach the same conclusion. So why does Rabbi Shimon say that a slaughter that's not fit, that doesn't create a kosher animal, is not considered a shchita? Rabbi Mani, Bar Patish, Gamar mitvoach tevach v'hachein, because he learns it from the psukim in Bereshis, the pasuk in Bereshis, Perek Mem Gimel pasuk Tezayin, where Yosef tells his aide to prepare a meal for his brothers, and there he uses the language of tevoach tevach v'hachein. And the idea is malahalan shchita ru'uya. There, the tvuach, the shchita, is going to be a valid shchita because it is edible by his siblings. Avkan shchita ru'uya. So too, here as well, when it refers to shchita, it's got to be a proper shchita. Rabbi Meir, nami ligmar mitzvoach. Why doesn't Rabbi Meir learn from that language by Yosef and his brothers? So done in shchita mishchita, but ain't done in shchita mitzvicha. No, well the words are different, right? The words aren't shchita when it talks about Yosef. It talks about tavoach, tevach. It's not. It's a different word. It means the same thing, means to slaughter, but it doesn't. It's not the exact same word, and so as a result, we don't want to create a gzeira shava from a different word. Well, manafkamina, who cares that it's a different word? As we often ask, Hatana debe Rabbi Shmuel. We have a very commonly cited brisa in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, V'shava Kohen, Uva Kohen, that when it comes to the Kohen going into a house that is potentially going to be ruled as having tzarat, we make a connection between when the Kohen, the language of the Kohen returning, to the language of the Kohen coming to the house. And we say that that if in fact and as a result, we make a gzera shava between the two. And in the situation where the stain on the house, the taras that is seen in the house does not in fact grow, we will still apply the same rule over again and restart the clock in order to see what happens. And we wait until either it grows or it shrinks in order to see whether or not it's considered a house with tsaras or without tsaras. So Zohi Shiva, Zohi Bia, because it's the same basic meaning, even though the words are different. So Hani Mili Hecha Deleka Dadamwe. So the question that we're asking now on Rebbe Meir is, who cares that it's a different word? We do make different words into a Gzeira Shava. So the response is yeah, we make different words into a Gzeira Shava when there isn't a comparable word. Aval Ika Didamile, but here there is a comparable word. So Mididamile Yafina. So we'll learn it from the more comparable word. We'll learn Shchita from Shchita and not Shchita from Tvicha. Rabbi Shimon Nami Ligmar Mishkute Chutz. Well, then why? What about Rabbi Shimon? Shouldn't we learn use the Gzeira Shava and say that just as when it comes to Shchute Chutz, that it's a slaughtering that results in a non-kosher animal because you slaughtered it outside the Beis Hamikdash is going to is considered a shchita, and therefore you have violated the prohibition of shchutei chutz, and so just as that is the case over there, and it doesn't matter that the animal isn't kosher, so too when it comes to oto ve'et beno, it shouldn't matter whether it's kosher. Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon say that? Because Rabbi Shimon would tell you done in chulin mechulin. Well, that is a special rule by Kodesh. Sure, by Kodesh maybe you could have a slaughter that doesn't result in a kosher animal, and yet it's still called slaughter. But when it comes to a chulin animal, if it doesn't result in a kosher animal, we're not going to call it slaughter. We're not going to call that shchita. Ain't done in chulin mikdashim, because we don't want to learn chulin rules of oto ve'et beno from kudshim rules of shchita shchutei chutz. So for Rabbi Meir, what about Rabbi Meir? Doesn't Rabbi Meir also not want to learn chulin from kudshim? No, atu osov esbeno b'kudshim milo nahig. He would respond and say, with the last word on this topic, to Rabbi Shimon, no, oto ve'etbeno, as we saw back in the last chapter, applies also to kudshim. And so as a result, it is totally valid to learn something that has both a kudshim element and a chulin element from something that is a kudshim element. And so hainu dekam or Rabbi Chia, and that's why Rabbi Chia told us at the very beginning of our Gemara on this Mishnah, he told us, Ra Rabbi Dvarav shel Rabbi Meir ba'oto ve'et beno ushna'o b'lashon chachamim. This is why Rabbi saw Rabbi Meir's opinion as being right with respect to it and its offsprings, meaning that when it comes to the prohibition of it and its offspring, and you had these two options as to whether to learn that shchita, that it doesn't result in a kosher animal, is it a good shchita or is it not? Rabbi Meir's logic is a little stronger, because it's okay to learn something that has both chulin elements and kudshim elements from something that has kudshim elements. And after all, it allows you to use the same word and learn shchita from shchita rather than shchita from tevicha. And that's why Rebbe used in the Mishnah, in the last perek, he specifically referenced the Rebbe Meir's position as if it was the Chachamim who said it, because he wanted a paskin like Rebbe Meir in that situation. So my taima to Rebbe Meir bekisoy adam. All right, so now we come to kisoy adam. What about over here? So why does Rebbe Meir say that even when it comes to covering the blood, that when you have slaughter that doesn't work, because the animal's not kosher, it's going to be still called the shchita and trigger the obligation to cover the blood? So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Gamar shvicha mishchutei chutz. Again, same reasoning, except a different word. There, we have both the aspect of spilling blood, because remember that the mitzvah of uh, of Kisui Adam is in a pasuk where it says V'shafach es damo v'chisahu be'afar, that you spilled its blood and you cover it with dirt. So it doesn't have the word shchita, so he can't learn it from the word shchita, but instead he learns it from the word shvicha, meaning that when it comes to the kodshim slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, it also has the word shvicha, and so as a result, yes, let me hold on. In Vayikra, I believe it's Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin Pasuk Dalid. It also has the word shvicha, and so as a result, that's the situation. And so as a result, we're going to learn that again, just when it comes to the spilling of blood of an animal slaughtered outside the courtyard, it's going to be considered a valid shchita, even though the animal is not kosher. So too, Rebbe Meir would say, when it comes to covering the blood, even though the animal's not kosher, as all the examples in our Mishnah, the animal still requires covering the blood. So malahala and shchita she'ena ru'uya shma shchita, just as over there by kodshim, it's not considered a valid shchita. Avkan, but it is, I mean, even it's not considered, even though it doesn't work and the animal's not kosher, it's called a shchita. Avkan, shchita she'ena ru'uya shma shchita. So too here, even though it results in all of these non-kosher animals, it's going to be called a shchita. Rabbi Shimon, what about Rabbi Shimon? Why does he say that you need to have it be a kosher animal? Asher yeachel ksiv. Well, remember when we saw the what does the pasuk say in connection with Kisui Adam? Well, the pasuk says, "V'ish ish mibnei Yisrael umin agera gar b'socham." So any Jew or person who's living with them, asher yatzud seid chaya o of, that is capturing a wild animal or a bird, asher ye'achel, that is going to be eaten, that is edible. And so as a result, that those words that are specifically written in connection with the concept of covering blood, that's telling us that that the shchita that triggers the obligation to cover blood must result in an animal that's edible. Rebbe Meir, what about Rebbe Meir? Why doesn't he have those words Asher Yachel in the pasuk also? So what does he use them for? No, that's coming to tell you that if the bird itself that you shech is not kosher, well then it's not going to be subject to the requirement to cover the blood. And so it's not about this particular animal, but it's about the nature of the species. And of course, the same thing would be true about a chaya. If you chose a lion as a chaya, it doesn't chew its cud or have split hooves. Maybe it chews its cud. I don't think so. But in any event, it doesn't chew its cud and doesn't have split hooves. And so as a result, it's not kosher. So you don't have to, if you shecht it, even if you use a proper methodology of shchita, you're not going to have to cover the blood. That's what Rebbe Meir uses with Asher Yeachel. What about Rebbe Shimon? How does he learn about other animals that doesn't apply? Rebbe Shimon, Of tame my taima. Why is it that a non-kosher bird, or for that matter, a non-kosher chaya, is excluded? Delav barachilahu, because it's not fit to be eaten. So treifa nami lav barachilahu. The whole point is that it's one lesson. The lesson is it edible? And so Rebbe Meir says it's not focused on whether this animal is edible, it's whether in theory it could be edible. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's meant, when it says Asher Yachel in that pasuk, it's about this particular animal. And so that's how you end up with the two different viewpoints. And here, again, V'hainu da'amar Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said that Rabbi Dvarav shall Rabbi Shimon. When it comes to this argument, Rabbi Shimon's the one who has the last word. He seems to have the better opinion, and therefore, Rabbi Shimon, what did Rabbi do when he taught our Mishnah? So, Kisui Adam, when it comes to Kisui Adam, Rabbi thought that Rabbi Shimon was right, and so therefore, Ushna'o v'lashon chachamim, and that's why in our he taught in our Mishnah, Rabbi taught Rabbi Shimon's opinion as if it was the opinion of the Chachamim. And so now
But
he explained.
he's not talking about all chayot, though. He's talking about those that were not intrinsically kosher, right?
No, that's Rabbi Meir's position. Rabbi Shimon's position is any chaya that it results in a non-kosher animal, even if it's a kosher chaya theoretically. You shech the deer, but then it
Right, a
turns out
deer.
that
I was
there was
thinking
a
of a deer.
what?
I was thinking of a deer. A deer would be is a kosher animal.
Yes, exactly. And so Rabbi Meir would tell you that even if you shech the deer and you find out that it was a treifa, you no longer you still have to cover the blood. But Rabbi Shimon would say, no. Is the animal that you just shechted actually kosher? No, because the deer was a treifa. And as a result, Rabbi Shimon says in our Mishnah, and it does so in the name of the Chachamim, because Rebbe agrees with Rabbi Shimon, and therefore changes the authorship of Rabbi Shimon's statement and says it as the words of the Chachamim, because he wants to paskin that way. And so that's why in our Mishnah it says that the Chachamim say, no, you're putter from having to cover the blood in that situation. Okay, so now
Because it became a treifa.
because it became a treifa. Exactly.
But the
Okay, so
animal itself is kosher.
yes, the animal itself is kosher. That's the debate, right? The debate in our Mishnah is do we focus on the animal itself? That's Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Shimon's position, and the Chachamim position in our Mishnah, because Rabbi agrees with him. And therefore, you focus on the animal itself, and all the examples in our Mishnah are non-kosher animals, such as, again, a treifa, an animal for avodah zarah, a chullin inside the base of Migdash, a kodesh outside the base of Migdash, and a animal that is supposed to get skila. So in all five cases, those animals are never going to be kosher. And so in those situations, even though the nature of the animal, the species of the animal is kosher, Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to do kisui dam, and that's the view of Chachamim in our Mishnah, because Rebbe agrees with him. And Rebbe Meir says, no, don't focus on the facts in front of us. Focus on the nature of the species in general. And these five cases, even though you can't eat this animal, these species are kosher, and therefore you have to do kisui adam. Okay, so the Gemara now quotes a view that Rebbe Meir's and Rebbe Shimon's views regarding whether a slaughter that is not fit constitutes shechita are not as absolute as we have seen so far. And it is to this that I was referring yesterday. I forgot that it was in today's daf as opposed to yesterday's daf. So Amar Rebbe Abba, as we turn to Pei Hey Amabet. Lo lakol Amar Rebbe Meir shchita she'ena ru'uya shmei shchita. It's not all the time that Rebbe Meir would tell you that a slaughter that doesn't actually result in a kosher animal is not called shchita. Why? Because Moda Rebbe Meir she'ein matira Moda Rebbe Meir she'ein matirasa be'achila. Right? There is Rebbe Meir would agree that even though it's still called shchita, it doesn't allow you to eat the animal. Right? So even though it's called shchita, it's not going to let you eat the animal. V'lo l'kol Rabbi Shimon shchita she'ena ru'uya lo shma shchita. And similarly, when Rabbi Shimon says that every shchita that doesn't result in a kosher animal is not called a shchita, he doesn't mean that all the time either. Because Moda Rabbi Shimon shemitaharata midei nevela, that it can result in purifying the animal from being constituted in nevela. As we know with respect to, and this is the reference that Ken made yesterday, that when it comes to a treifa that has shchita, even though Rabbi Shimon would say that it's not a good shchita, it still doesn't let the animal become a nevela. It stops the animal from becoming a nevela. So now we're going to look into these 2 points and see, is there anything that's not obvious in what Rabbi Abba said? Because it is pretty clear that, of course, Rabbi Meir would not tell you that you could eat the animal. And of course, Rabbi Shimon would agree that when it comes to a treifa, that it's not going to be a nevela. So what is Rabbi Abba really teaching us? So Amar lo l'kol Amar Rabbi Meir shchita she'ena ru'uya shma shchita. Moda Rabbi Meir she'en mitarasa ba'achila. Pshita, that's obvious that if that the shchita, even though Rabbi Meir is going to call it a good shchita, isn't going to let you eat it. Treifa b'shchita mi mishtarya? Is he going to allow you to eat a treifa as a result of the fact that the shchita is called a good shchita? Of course not. Lo, tzricha l'shochet has a treifa umatza ben tisha chai. No, the situation is the following. We're dealing with a ben pekua. We're dealing with a situation where one finds inside the shechted treifa a live animal, and that live animal is one that has lived for 9 months. And so, as a result, we say with respect to it that it effectively is that you can that if this mother was a kosher animal, well, then you would have shechted the baby animal, even though it's a 9 month fetus, and you would be able to eat it even without shechting it. But now, so salka daita, I might have thought, that since this baby animal that's inside the mother is considered as if the mother was shechted, because even a shechita that doesn't result in a proper kosher animal, namely the mother, because the mother is a treifa, we still call it a shechita. Tahani le shechitas imo beloli by shechita. Maybe we should say in that situation that the shechita works on the fetus and doesn't require its own shechita. So Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi Abba needs to tell us his statement. And indeed, this animal does require shechita, as we saw that we said, and Rashi points this out that when it comes to a the fetus inside the mother animal, it effectively has four different pipes that could be shechted. It has the mother's two pipes and it has its own two pipes. And therefore, when the mother's two pipes are not shechted properly because the mother is a treifa, so therefore it has its own two pipes and it can be shechted properly and it can be still eaten. The tizbra, is that reasonable? Rabbi Meir ben Pekua Tal and Shchita. But 1 second, Rabbi Meir is the one who says that a Ben Pekua always needs Shchita. Meaning, how could you possibly have the Hava Amina? How could you possibly have thought, as part of your question, that maybe the fetus wouldn't require Shchita? Rabbi Meir's position, and that's who we're speaking of within, so he always requires Shchita, even for a Ben Pekua. Lo tzricha de Rebbe sabar la Rebbe Meir v'sabar la Rabbanan. Now, the chiddush of Rebbe Abba is not within the position of Rebbe Meir. It's in the position of Rebbe, because Rebbe agrees with Rebbe Meir with respect to uh, 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 the shchita position, namely that shchita that doesn't that maybe that shchita that is not a valid shchita is still that doesn't result in a kosher animal is still called shchita, and yet Savar Karabanan, he agrees with the rabbis in another way. Savar Rabbi Meir de Amar Shchita She'ena Ru'uya Shma Shchita, right? He holds like Rabbi Meir, who says that slaughter that's not fit still constitutes Shchita. But Savar Karabanan de Amar Shchita Zimo Mitarto, because he agrees that a Ben Pekua whose mother is properly shechted is allowed to be eaten. But in this situation, it would not be allowed to be eaten because the mother is a treifa. And that's why we need to have Rabbi Abba to tell us that actually, even though the mother is a treifa, and even though an unfit slaughter is called shchita, we still, you cannot eat the infant. Kevan to Amarabanan Shchita mitar imo mitarato. Since the rabbis do generally allow shchita to purify the infant, Tahani le shchitas imo veloli by shchita. So I might have thought that since this shchita is called a good shchita, maybe you won't need shchita on the baby. So Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi Abba teaches us that according to Rebbe's viewpoint of Rebbe Meir, you would in fact still need shchita for the baby, even though it's still called a good shchita. Then now we go to the other half of Rabbi Abba's statement. Velola kol amar Rabbi Shimon shchita she'ena.
So Rebbe Meir would require shchita in any
Rabbi Meir
case?
would certainly require shechita because he says that even when you have a fetus that is within the mother and the mother is properly shechted and is totally kosher, the fetus still requires shechita. So of course Rabbi Meir would say it, but the point is that even Rebbe, who agrees with Rebbe Meir with respect to one aspect, but agrees with the rabbis with respect to the fact that when you shech the mother and their baby is a 9-month baby inside it and it comes out alive, that shechita is valid for the baby. Even
Right.
even Rebbe, who agrees with that position of the rabbis, would not use Rebbe Meir's position of saying that an unfit shechita is still called a shechita to say that when the mother is a treifa, you don't need to shech the baby as well. And he would say no, because the mother is a treifa, now the baby needs its own shechita. And so that was what Rabbi Abba was teaching us.
So
Below
Reb Meir doesn't hold by this whole the learning before that the Ben Pakua doesn't require shechita. He says always needs shechita.
That is correct. That is correct. V'lo l'kol amar Rabbi Shimon. So back into the Gemara. V'lo l'kol amar Rabbi Shimon. Shchita she'ena ru'ya lo shma shchita. And so again, Rabbi Abba said a second statement that in fact, when Rabbi Shimon made his statement that a slaughtering that doesn't result in a kosher animal is not called a shchita, of course he means that it is called a shchita. Moda Rabbi Shimon shemitarta medei nevela. That it would make an animal not a nevela and therefore not be that tame. Pshita, of course that's the case. Everybody knows that. Damar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, v'amri lav b'masnisa tana. And some people say it was a brisa and not in the name of Rav. V'chi yamos min behema. That why does it say when some animals die, from among the animals that die, that's where, and this is from the pasuk that talks about nevela. It's Vayikra Perak Yud Aleph pasuk Lametet. Mixas behema mitama, umixas behema ein mitama. There are some animals that die and are not kosher and will transmit tuma like a nevela, and there are some that do not. Be'ezo, and which ones do not? Zo treifa shishchata, that is a treifa that has been slaughtered. And so everybody agrees to this statement. Why do I need you, Rabbi Abba, to tell us that Rabbi Shimon would not agree with this statement? Lo tzricha l'shochet es hatreifa v'hi chulin ba'azara. No, we're dealing with the following situation. What if the animal that was slaughtered was a treifa, and it's chulin inside the Beis Hamikdash? Titania, because we have a brisa that teaches the following: hashoches as a treifa. If you slaughter a treifa, v'chein hashoches v'nimtzas treifa, or you slaughter an animal and it turns out to be a treifa, zeh v'zeh chulin ba'azara. Or and both of these, we're dealing with a situation where it was chulin inside the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Shimon matir behana. Rabbi Shimon says that you're allowed to benefit from it. Meaning, why are you allowed to benefit from this animal? Because if in fact it was shechita inside the Beis Hamikdash of a kodesh animal, or an animal that could be eaten, you would not be allowed to benefit from it. The chachamim osrim, but the chachamim say you're not allowed to eat it. So salcha daita kamina, I might have thought that hoava amar Rabbi Shimon mutar b'hana. Why is it that Rabbi Shimon says that this is permitted for hana? Alma lav shchita hiklal. It's because this is not considered a valid shchita. So given that this animal is not considered a valid shchita, maybe we should say that this chulin that was shechted and it turned out to be a treifa inside the Beis Hamikdash is going to now trigger the laws of nevela. So aiming midei nevela nami lo matara, given that we're treating it as not shchita with respect to whether or not you can benefit from it, maybe we should treat it as not shchita with respect to nevela. So kamash malan, that's why Rabbi Abba is telling us that in fact, even in that situation, it would be considered purified from the status of nevela and therefore would not have traditional tuma of nevela. Okay.
What's the benefit? How can he? How does he hold you could benefit? On what basis do he say one can derive benefit from this animal?
Uh,
Reb Shimon.
yeah. Well, you can take it out and sell it to a non-Jew.
Okay, but on what basis? I mean, it's a
Well,
treifa.
because the animal didn't have a traditional shechita, because it's not kosher. Now it's outside the category of not kosher, and therefore it's in the category of not kosher, and therefore what you did in the Beis Hamikdash is not considered shchisas chulin ba'azara. And as a result, we're not going to create that prohibition because that animal could never be a sacrifice because it's a treifa. That's Rabbi Shimon's position. And so, because that animal could never be a sacrifice, it could never truly be a chulin shechted in the azara. The only time a chulin shechted in azara is going to be a problem is if it could have been a sacrifice. And so that's why now it's not considered a valid shechita, because again, Rabbi Shimon's view is that if it doesn't work, it's not considered shechita. So now that we said it doesn't work, so it's not considered shechita, maybe this is actually a nevela now. Maybe it's just like you went up to it and you shot it in the head. And the answer is Rabbi Abba is teaching us that Kamash Malan, that's not the case. All right, so let's quickly
So
finish
therefore,
up.
wouldn't he hold then that the shechita would prevent this animal from being considered an avela? Wouldn't Reb Shimon also hold that?
Yes, that's the Kamash Malan. That's what Rabbi Abba is
Okay,
teaching us. Exactly.
okay.
Okay, so Amrle Rav Papa lo Abaye, Rav Papa asked Abaye, Sub v'Sava Rabbi Shimon Chulin ba'Azara da'oraisahi. 1 second. This all implies that Rabbi Shimon would think that Chulin inside the courtyard is must be some kind of biblical prohibition. So Amrle, yes, that is correct. He does think that it's a biblical prohibition. V'hatanan Rabbi Shimon Omer. Chulin shenishkatu ba'azara yisrafu ba'esh. That if in fact you slaughter chulin inside the Beis Hamikdash, you have to go take it outside the Beis Hamikdash and burn it in fire. V'chein chaya shenishkata ba'azara. And you know what? The same thing is true with respect to a chaya. Even though, of course, that chaya could never be a korban inside the Beis Hamikdash. So we're going to have to understand what's the story there. So amrat Bishlam Raisa, if you say that when it comes to the chulin animal, that is a behema animal, and you're so as a result, that's why you're shechting it. But now you're shechting a chulin animal in the Beis Hamikdash. So of course you have to throw, and so that is the prohibition that is biblical. So as a result, and you therefore you have to take it out and burn it. That's why when it comes to the chaya, we're also going to make you burn it, because we're worried that in fact that you might, given if we allow you not to burn it and instead sell it to somebody who's not Jewish or even eat it yourself, well then we're worried that you might think that you could slaughter a behema that is a chulin animal inside the courtyard. So so as a result, that's why we're going to also make you burn the chaya. But ela amrat derabbanan. But if you tell me that the chulin animal's requirement to burn it in the Beis Hamikdash is to burn it outside the Beis Hamikdash because it's not considered kosher, it's an invalid animal, and you're not allowed to benefit from it. And so if you tell me that that's only a rabbinic prohibition, a rabbinic requirement, so behema my taima. So what's the reason for a behema? That we're going to make you burn it, because dilma asi lamechal l'kachim b'chutz. Because if we don't make you burn it and then you take it outside the Beis Hamikdash and you now eat it, people are going to think that you are eating kachim outside the Beis Hamikdash, and so as a result they will come to do the same thing. So he gufa gzera. Well, now that is a decree. That is a rabbinic decree. And would we make one decree to do another decree? Of course not. We wouldn't make one decree on another decree. And so as a result, we're not going to if this was in fact only a rabbinic prohibition, we wouldn't need to make a decree about, we wouldn't need to make a rule about a chaya. Because if you saw somebody shecht a chaya inside the Beis Hamikdash and then eat it outside the Beis Hamikdash, nobody's going to think that, oh, you can also do something else because it's a chaya. So as a result, we wouldn't make a decree about it. But if, in fact, it was biblically prohibited to do even a chulin animal inside, well, then we would decree about a chaya, because maybe someone would come to do a chulin animal inside, and that would be biblically prohibited. And so we will make a one-stage prohibition for a rabbinic prohibition, a rabbinic gzeira, but we're not going to make a gzeira on a gzeira. And so therefore, we see that, in fact, Rabbi Shimon does agree that you cannot benefit from a chulin animal that is slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash. And the one exception to that is when it turns out to be a treifa, because in that situation, it was never kosher in the Beis Hamikdash in the first place, and therefore it's not a valid shechita, and that's why it's not going to be prohibited. And that's why it is a good proof for us to say that, in fact, Rabbi Abba would tell us that Rabbi Shimon would say that even though it's not considered a shechita in that situation, it does take it outside the category of nevela. So that brings us
Well,
to a story.
what's the makor? What's the biblical source that the we were saying we say it's biblical, not rabbinic, not decree on decree. What is the biblical source for the that the chai
So
is
the
not?
biblical source is indirect. It's the fact that we say that you can only shech a chulin animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. That it's only when you're far away from the Beis Hamikdash, that's where you should shech the chulin animal. And so the implication is that you can't shech the chulin animal inside the Beis Hamikdash. So it's not. Remember, we saw this I think now two parakim ago, maybe, that we saw that there's no lashes that are associated with it. No, maybe it was last parak, maybe it was Otobet, but no. And so, so the point is that it may not be subject to lashes, but it is prohibited. It's again not explicit; it's an implicit prohibition, and that's why there are no lashes. But everybody is considering it biblically prohibited. And the question that we're really talking about is the meat, the benefit from that meat, biblically prohibited? And the answer is yes, as evidenced by the fact that Rabbi Shimon says that the chulin animal that was shechted in the courtyard needs to be burned, obviously in a fire outside the Beis Hamikdash, in order so that you don't benefit from it. And so
But
now the
normally,
Gemara is going
isn't
to
there pasuk? Isn't there if we say something's biblical, don't we have a
no, not always. It could be implied in psukim, and believe this is only implied in psukim. So the Gemara is now going to share a story involving the covering of blood, which takes us all the way to the Mishnah on Pevav Amud Aleph. So for that story, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. You'll have a good time with that story. It's a fun story. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
So we still don't. It a little bothers me a bit that we don't have a pasuk on which to hang our hat, so to speak, to say that it's biblical. There's look at the derive it
Yeah,
directly from the
it's
pasuk.
derived indirectly from a pasuk that says that you can only shecht animals, chulin animals, away from the Beis Hamikdash. So the implication of that is you cannot shecht chulin animals inside the Beis Hamikdash. So it's a direct result of the psukim. It just isn't an explicit pasuk that says you cannot shecht chulin animals inside the Beis Hamikdash. That's my recollection.
I see.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Have a fabulous Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.